The room had gone quiet in the way only failure can create. 20 specialists stood frozen around a long glass table, their screens glowing with charts that meant nothing anymore. Millions of dollars had been spent, weeks had been lost, and the problem still refused to move. Deadlines loomed. Investors waited. The CEO sat at the head of the table, jaw tight, eyes sharp, running out of patience. In the far corner of the room, almost invisible, a janitor pushed his cart slowly across the floor. The company had built its reputation on solving impossible problems. This one was supposed to be no different. A critical system error had brought an entire operation to a standstill. Every solution introduced another issue. Every meeting ended the same way. Frustration, blame, silence. The specialist spoke in complex terms, layering one theory over another, confident that brilliance had to be complicated. The janitor had been cleaning this building for years. He worked early mornings and late nights, when important people were gone and important conversations were finished. He knew which rooms mattered by how quiet they became. This one had been quiet for days. As he wiped fingerprints from the glass walls, he listened. Not because he wanted to interfere, but because listening had always been his habit. Specialists began another round of debate. One blamed outdated data. Another blamed flawed assumptions. A third suggested rebuilding everything from scratch. The CEO rubbed his temples. The clock on the wall ticked louder than anyone realized. As the janitor reached the whiteboard, he noticed something that made him pause. A pattern repeated across diagrams. Same assumption, written in different ways. He leaned closer, eyes narrowing, memory stirring. He hesitated. People like him were not meant to speak in rooms like this. He knew that. Still, the solution sat plainly in his mind, simple enough to explain in a sentence. He told himself to keep quiet. It was not his place, but the tension in the room pressed on him. Failure was about to become permanent. He cleared his throat, softly at first. No one noticed. He tried again, voice steady but respectful. A few heads turned, irritation flashing across their faces. The CEO looked up, surprised more than angry. The janitor gestured toward the screen and asked a single, calm question. Not a lecture. Not a suggestion. Just a question. The room froze. Words died in midair. Specialists stared at the data as if seeing it for the first time. In that moment, before anyone spoke, the balance of the room shifted. And no one yet realized that everything they believed about expertise, intelligence, and value was about to change. The silence stretched longer than anyone expected. The janitor's question hung in the air, simple and unadorned, cutting through layers of complexity like a blade through fabric. One specialist frowned and leaned closer to the screen. Another slowly sat back in his chair. The confidence that had filled the room minutes earlier began to drain, replaced by something far more uncomfortable. Doubt. Someone tried to respond, but the words came out tangled. They rechecked a model. Then another. Fingers moved quickly across keyboards, not with certainty now, but with urgency. The CEO watched closely, his expression unreadable. He had seen this team perform under pressure before. He had never seen them look like this. Point. One of the specialists spoke again, quieter this time, pointing to a line of code that had been taken for granted since the beginning. Another admitted they had built every solution on that same assumption. The room began to shift, not into chaos, but into clarity. The problem had never been as complex as they made it. They had been circling the wrong foundation. Less than a minute passed before the truth became undeniable. The system failure unraveled almost effortlessly once the flawed assumption was removed. What weeks of effort could not fix collapsed under one moment of honest reconsideration. The janitor stood still, hands resting on his cart, eyes lowered, as if he had already stepped out of the moment. No one laughed. No one spoke over anyone else. Embarrassment moved through the room quietly. These were experts, leaders in their fields, and the solution had come from the person they had not even acknowledged. The CEO stood slowly, eyes still on the screen, then turned toward the janitor. He asked him to stay. Specialists gathered their things without instruction, filing out in silence. Some avoided looking at the janitor. Others glanced back with expressions they did not know how to name. When the door closed, the room felt different, smaller. Honest. The CEO asked a single question. How did you see it so fast? The janitor answered calmly. He explained that before life took its turns, before responsibilities narrowed his options, he had studied the same system. Learned to look for assumptions first, not answers. Complexity, he said gently, often hides simple mistakes. He never thought that knowledge would matter again. The CEO listened without interrupting. When the janitor finished, there was no dramatic reaction, just a slow nod. At that moment, the CEO understood something he had missed for years. Talent does not disappear because circumstances change, and sometimes the most valuable voice in the room belongs to the person no one thought to hear. The next morning, the building felt different. Word had already spread, not through announcements, but through quiet conversations and knowing looks. The specialists arrived early, avoiding the conference room that had humbled them. Screens lit up across the office as systems came back online, stable and smooth. The crisis that once threatened everything was gone, solved not by force or expense, but by perspective. When the janitor arrived, he pushed his cart through the lobby as usual, expecting another ordinary shift. He did not notice the CEO waiting near the elevators until someone called his name. The janitor stopped, confused, unsure if he had done something wrong. The CEO approached without his usual urgency, holding a badge instead of a tablet. He explained the decision simply. The company needed people who saw clearly, who were not blinded by titles or noise. Janitor was offered a role that matched his ability, not his uniform. The salary was adjusted. The hours changed. More importantly, the door that had always been closed was now open. The janitor listened quietly, the same way he always had. He did not celebrate. He did not boast. He asked one question in return. Would he still be allowed to learn? The CEO smiled for the first time in days and said yes. Over the following weeks, the specialists worked alongside him, not above him. Conversations changed. People asked more questions and made fewer assumptions. Culture shifted in small but lasting ways. Meetings became clearer. Solutions came faster. Respect was no longer tied to position, but to contribution. The janitor no longer pushed a cart, but he carried something heavier, responsibility, and something lighter. Longing. 898. As he left the building one evening, badge clipped to his jacket, he paused at the door. City looked the same, but he felt different. Not because his life had suddenly become easier, but because it had finally become honest. In 1 minute, a problem had been solved. In the days that followed, something far greater had been corrected. A reminder that brilliance does not always sit at the table. Sometimes it waits patiently, until someone is brave enough to listen.